Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special Wednesday night edition of the People Show with yours truly, Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator. Thank you all for joining. I hope that you all come on in and participate in the program. If you saw the promo earlier today and yesterday, we've been talking about um, a couple of things that have been taking place, and certainly we want to highlight. There's always um, there's some critical things that are going on. There's some great things that are going on in the midst of the those uncomfortable things. We saw news story today of a woman in Ohio where an 81-year-old man shot and killed an Uber driver who was, I guess, scammed and tricked to going to his house, and he said that he received a scam call that somebody was threatening or trying to extort money from him, and he was to give the money to, I guess, this Uber driver, and he thought that the Uber driver was a part of that scam, and he took matters into his own hand and followed her outside with a gun, and you could see going across her vehicle where she obviously had the cameras on in her car, but you could only see directly in front of her car, and you can see her passing, backing back up in her car, and the homeowner, who is an 81-year-old white man, and she was a 61-year-old black woman, backing up, scared for her life. And you can unfortunately hear the disturbing uh, of gunfire that he shoots multiple times and kills this woman who was an innocent victim of an apparent scam. Well, he has since been charged with felony murder in this case, and will probably end up spending the rest of his life in prison because he's 81 years old, and the sentence carries any 15 years to life in prison. There was no reason for him to kill her at all. There was no reason for him to shoot her. It was clear that she was the victim of a parent scam. She was trying to show him that she was coming to pick up a package because she had gotten an alert, and she took the call and went there. All he should have done is he should have contacted the police department. He should have contacted the police department, notified the authorities. He did not have to take that matter to that drastic end. And this woman lost her life over an apparent scam. Just horrific. Just horrific. Um, so this is just an unbelievable story. According to this article, an 81-year-old Ohio man has been charged with murder after allegedly shooting an Uber driver who thought she was picking up a package from the man's house. Both appeared to have been victims of scam phone calls. The Clark County Sheriff's Office said in a news release the Uber driver, Lolitha Hall, was found shot multiple times near 81-year-old William Brock's South Charleston home on March 25th. Brock, who had called 911 and had an injury to his head, ear, and was bleeding when police arrived, according to a police report. Hall, a black woman, was taken to the hospital in Dayton, where she died of her injuries. Investigators discovered that Brock had earlier received a scam call about an incarcerated relative, which had involved threats and demands for money. An unknown man told Brock over the phone he needed to pay $12,000 to get his nephew out of jail, according to a police report. Brock told police the caller threatened to kill him and his nephew if he didn't pay the ransom, according to the report. The same caller, on an accomplice, later hired Hall using the Uber act to pick up a package from Brock's residence, according to investigators. Hall was not aware that Brock had been threatened, the sheriff said. Ms. Hall, suffering from medical conditions and unarmed man, made no threats or assaults towards Mr. Brock and made no demands other than to ask about the package she was sent to retrieve, according to the sheriffs. What a tragic, what a tragic, what a tragic story. They both were people of apparent scams, but there is this seeming idea that people with guns, I am not a gun proponent of any matter. I don't care about people who want to talk about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment has been bastardized, has been manipulated to meet other people's political agenda. I'm not even getting into it. I'm not a gun person. Will never have one, never had one. And I've been robbed a couple of times and had a gun pointed at me. Still will never get one. But here is a man who had plenty of opportunity. If you've seen the story, you can go back and you can see the story. He had plenty of opportunity to call the police. Just like he was scammed, then that means that she could have been scammed. He knew, obviously, that it was a scam, and he should have called the police to have the police to investigate. And the police would have come and they would have found that this woman was apparently scammed as well. Just a horrific, horrific story. I'm sure there'll be more that we'll be talking about that in the days to come, in the weeks to come, and certainly to see what the fate is of the man, or this Mr. Brock, 81 years old, who killed this woman. I don't see any excuse for this at all. Just because he was scammed, it doesn't mean that you take a gun and you go kill somebody. At all. Doesn't justify it. One bit. We got that in the news. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about tonight. I want to share with you information that I am continuously studying, that we're continuously talking about. And this is probably going to be done in a series of podcasts talking around and talking about this situation, what happened with Dexter Reed on March 24th, first on the west side of Chicago, where he ultimately was shot and killed by tactical police officers. There were 5 tactical police officers that sought him out, and as much as in their report, they claim that they pulled him over for a seatbelt infraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out for us police procedures on the use of force. And I have the guidelines for their force option models. I took this all from the Chicago Police Department. So none of this is hyperbole. None of this is my opinion. I'm going to put it up and we're going to go through it together to see what the Chicago force option model, the Chicago Police Department's force option models or model is, from de-escalation to escalations. And we're just going to go through it. And then you will be able to make a reasonable, intelligent, informed judgment on whether or not this should have happened. We're going to go through it together. We're going to absorb the information. And again, this is not going to happen in one podcast. It may be multiple podcasts that we would have to do in order for this to take place. I'm getting an alarm alert. However, the idea is for us to learn, right? These things happen, and we've had a number of them that happen, and I'm sure we're all exhausted. We're all exhausted about these killings taking place with these police officers, and police officers unjustifiably, in some cases, discharging their weapons and fatally shooting someone, killing someone. But we're going to allow for ourselves to take a step back and let's observe, let's learn this information. I have been reading, studying, talking with law enforcement professionals, getting an understanding from them as to how they observe things, and certainly for them to help me to understand the nuances of these policies. So we're going to learn this and go through this together. Now we're going to skip through some sections, but the first one that we are going to utilize is that we are going to we're going to pull up the Chicago Police Department's force options model. That's the one that we're going to pull up. I just want you to take a look at this, and then we're going to go through it to see just what it is, right? And what it requires. So this is the force options model. The force options model. I'm going to try to see if I can't get this. Let's see if we can't move that background out of there. Let's see. Let's do this right now. Okay. I'm not sure how to quite deal with that one, but all right. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at the force options model. Now it goes from de-escalation to escalation. So what this model is, and it shows the training of a police officer or police officers as to what uses, mitigating tactics that they could use in dealing with a subject. So, or somebody that is considered to be, they have cooperative, passive resistors, active resistors, assailants, deadly force. You see that it goes from green to red. The green is at the lowest. In the middle is the subject. And above that, it talks about the behavior. And then in the green, it tells what type of force can be used. So we're looking at all of these categories, and we're going to go through them for ourselves so that we learn what they are. And then once we have a good understanding or a better understanding of what that is, then we can make a more informed opinion about what took place, what should have taken place, or what didn't take place. It is always my desire for us to be informed. I like to deal with facts. I like to deal with what is true rather than hyperbole and opinions or misinformation or emotions, which are not supported with any information. They just are emotions that we react to, and sometimes we react emotionally to misinformation. I don't want to be a part of the misinformation campaign or that factor. All right, so let's look at the Chicago Police Department force options model. So the first one, where is the de-escalation, the very lowest, where it says cooperative. What does that mean? That means that the subject is being cooperative, and in green, it talks about what the behavior is. So if you look at the first one, it says compliant without direction. Now, what that means is that a police officer or police officers show up, or they're, and the subject or subjects see the police officers and know why the police officers are there, and they are in compliance without the police officers ever having to utter a word, without any directions. They just know to respond. So, like, you're out in the park, you know that the park closes at a certain time, and people are still gathering at the park, and the police have been alerted, or the police are coming through to check throughout the park. And so the police are there at the park, and you see the cars, and everybody gets in their car and they leave or they disperse. That's what they call compliant without direction. You move to, and then if you look down below where it says the social control, simply means that the members' presence. Now, members means that there are police officers. So they're members of the police department, of the Chicago Police Department. And this is talking about the social control. So the members are present, but the compliance without direction, without the police officers or the members having to say anything. People were compliant. Then you move over to the second level of the green, where it says compliant only in response to a verbal direction. So, what's a communication? The communication is either by persuasion or advice or warning or direction from the members that are present. Meaning that they showed up to the park, people saw the police, and they knew that the park was closed, and they still didn't leave the park until the members of the police department had to approach and said to notify everybody, the park is closed at a certain hour. You all have to disperse and leave the park. And people get in their car and they leave. They call that compliant only in response to direction. It's still considered to be cooperative. Now you move to the second color, which is highlighted in yellow. It's the first yellow. So you have the first two greens, and then we have yellow. This subject is considered to be a passive resistor. A passive resistor, meaning non-movement in response to verbal direction, meaning that the police came, you recognized the police, you observed the police approached, and the police gave direction, and the directions were the park is closed, it's past the hour. And in Chicago, parks close at 9, some close at 9, some close at 10. Most close at 10. Then after that, you have to be out of the park, or you're supposed to be out of the park by 10. So Chicago police shows up. People are still gathering, talking, socializing. The police comes and says, okay, everybody, park is closed. Everybody's got to get in their cars, got to leave the park. So somebody or persons decide, I'm not going to leave the park. What's wrong with us being in the park? We should be able to be here in the park, and I don't want to leave. That's called a passive resistor, meaning someone who is non-movement in response to verbal direction. That's the highlighted in yellow. Passive resistance. What is the member's proportional response? Now, just keep these terms and keep these terms in mind. Members, meaning police officers. What are the police officers' proportional response? Now, this is indicating, as explained and as one would determine, that police officers have training, and police officers in any encounter has to apply what is called a balancing test. A balancing test. That's what they're required to apply. The balancing test. And let's see where I pull this up here. I'll make sure that I've got this. No, I think I got it over here. Okay, so lot that we have to deal with here. So let's see. Okay. All right. So remember I said it's a balancing test. Okay. So in the police directives of, it's called a balancing test, right? So in other words, you have to measure what you do and what course of actions that you take based on what the conditions are. And if that is the case, if you have to make these kinds of considerations, police officers are not to have knee-jerk reactions just because you have the authority to exert certain behavior or you have the powers to do certain things. As a professional, you also are to show professional constraint and certainly resistance to using the authority just because you have it and you can use your authority. It has to be proportional to the situation. It's called the member's proportional response. So if you have a person or persons that are not responding or not willing to respond to a verbal direction, this is what they say in holding what the proportional response would be. So you have certain techniques that you can apply, that you've been trained to exhibit, or you've been trained to use proportionally based on the circumstances. And what this is really saying is, it is saying that police officers must think. Everything is not reactionary. Everything is not at the escalation or the highest escalation point. It is proportional. And your response as a police officer, according to these trainings, they're saying their response has to be proportional to what is happening. So for a non-passive or for a passive resistor, we're still talking about a passive resistor. We're not talking about someone who is an aggressive or active resistor. We're talking about a passive resistor. What is a passive resistant? It says someone non-movement in response to a verbal direction. Police officers give somebody some direction, they don't comply. Somebody sitting in a car and the police officer says, roll your window down. In the case of Dexter Reed rolls his window halfway down. Dexter Reed looks out of his window. Dexter Reed sees people surrounding his car in plain clothes and unmarked cars. They don't identify themselves. They appear like they may be somebody with authority because they have vests on, they have guns on, they have batons, but no one acknowledges or no one announces their office in the Dexter Reed incident. No one announced their office. So maybe Dexter Reed thinks these might be some people who are coming after me, that may be impersonating police officers. I don't know. They didn't announce who they were. They had got on plain clothes. They got on, vests. But I don't know. because they never said that they were Chicago police officers. So what Dexter Reed did, according to what we saw, is he rolled his windows up and locked his door. That, from what I have been told, is he was considered at that moment to be a passive resistor. He was considered to be a passive resistor. Now, we're also going to we're going to look at the use of force. The use of force and how that applies, because that all plays into everything. So we're going to look at the use of force a little bit later on and go through those definitions of what the Chicago Police Department use of force policies and guidelines are. The guidelines. So we're going to talk about that. So a passive resistor is a person with non-compliant or non-movement in response to verbal direction. So I'll put this up on the screen so that you can read along with this and you can see it for yourself, that I'm not making something up or saying something different than what's in the Chicago Police Department's force options model. This means the use of force and the options that you have and the model. So force, options, model. Police officers are trained in these areas. So did these police officers, did they address or did they use any of their training in that situation? Again, you're going to be better equipped with information that you can make an objective, reasonable opinion, because that's all it will be, is an opinion, until such time that there has been some adjudications, decisions, final decisions made to the status of the police officers and what that means. We won't know that for some time. So passive resistors is a non-movement in response to verbal direction. Non-movement in response to verbal direction. How do you handle that? How do you respond to that? They have something called holding techniques, compliance techniques, controlled instruments, whether it be some type of, if you use a type of spray or mace, but you can't do that unless you get supervisory approval. So in other words, to use an agent, you can't just use that agent because you decide to use that agent. You have to get authorization from a supervisor. And in getting authorization from a supervisor, you have to provide the supervisor, as a police officer, with the information as to what the conditions are, what the temperature is like, meaning the attitudes of the people that are involved, but you got to get a supervisor's permission. What does that tell me? That if I have to get a supervisor's permission, that means that I have to take a step back. I have to think about this, and I have to get on the radio. I have to call for a supervisor either to show up or to get a supervisor on the radio and explain the situation to him. Whatever that case may be, that still means that I have to exercise real composure within and on duty as a police officer. I can't just exhort force because I have the power to do so. This is what these guidelines, this is what this model is demonstrating. Whether these police officers, these 5 tactical police officers, operated within the force options model. You watch the video, you've got this information, you can size them up side by side. You can put them side by side to determine whether or not these police officers operated within their training guidelines. Again, I'm asking for all of us to have an objective view, taking in all of the information. Let's get educated about this. We will learn something. And the most effective advocates for social justice are people who are equipped with great information. So let's equip ourselves with this information, and therefore we don't have to, right, just operate based on emotions or hyperbole or gossip, misinformation. I want you to be informed. So in order for them to use for a passive resistor any type of force, they call it an OC spray, you still need supervisory approval. You see that on the screen. It's right here, down here is where we're at in this section right here. All right, so it says in order to use an OC spray for a passive resistor, you have to get supervisory approval. Meaning you can't just operate on your own. You can't just act on your own because this person is a passive resistor. They're not a threat. They're not approaching. They're just non-compliant. They don't have a weapon of any type. So why would you need to use this kinds of force? And if you thought you needed to use that kind of force, you've got to call a supervisor. You've got to have a supervisor on the scene. That supervisor has to come, or that supervisor has to understand what is the condition of the scene, meaning that you have to explain it to them. And if you have to explain it to somebody, that means that you have to take a step back. You got to take a deep breath. You can't just go in blazing. You've got to get others involved. A passive resistor. A passive resistor is not a non-threatening person. Was Dexter Reed a passive resistor at the time that they asked for him to roll his window down, and he rolled his window down and then he rolled his window back up? and he locked his door. At that moment, was he a passive resistor? He wasn't threatening to anybody. At that very moment, he was a passive resistor. And being a passive resistor, in all of these areas, being a passive resistor, it says, or if you're going to take these kinds of actions, if you're going to take certain actions, just with a passive resistor, let's think about this. Just as a passive resistor, meaning just a person who doesn't move in response to a verbal direction. That's considered to be a passive resistor. That's it within their own guidelines. It's their own language. They give you a directive, you don't move. You don't threaten, you don't move, you don't do anything. Passive resistor. And in order to use any of these techniques, with the exceptions of maybe, depending upon the circumstances, having to use certain holding techniques or compliance techniques, meaning, hey, if you don't comply, then we will have to do this, or we may have to do that. We may have to take you into custody. We may have to write you a ticket if you don't comply. Passive resistance respond. The members must have a proportional response to a passive resistor. It says control instruments. I forget exactly what they said with control instruments, but I'm not going to go past. I'm going to go past there. But anything further than that, the last, the next two, which are using some type of a spray or what they call an LRAD. I'm not sure what that actually means. But they require supervisory approval. And again, supervisory approval to me means that you've got to think about what is going on. You got to take a step back. You got to take a deep breath. Then you get in contact with a supervisor. It simply is saying that you don't need to get aggressive just because you've got the power to do so. You got the power to do so. Doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. Just because you have the right to do it doesn't mean that it is right to do it at that time, at that moment. All right, so let's move to what an active resistor, the next column, the active resistor. On the screen, the active resistor. It's right here. All right. So we were here with the passive resistor. Now we go to the active resistor. What is the active resistor? The active resistor is movement to avoid physical control, meaning that the police, the authorities are asking you to do something. you don't comply, they're asking you to stand down, stand still, but you just don't. You continue to do what it is, or you continue to resist, or the police officer asks for you to provide the information or to come to them, you leave, you move to another area. That's called an active resistor. Movement to avoid any type of physical control. They're trying to take you into custody, or they're trying to have some restraint so that they can control the scene to try to mitigate any escalation of any problems. An active resistor. Movement to avoid physical control. Members' proportional response would be you might use a taser, depending on the person's actions. You try to diffuse pressure strikes. Or you may have to use some type of emergency takedown. So this gets a little bit more into the physical area, but it's not pulling a gun. It's certainly not shooting anybody. And you had to go through all these others and certainly consider all these others and all of these elements, or at least this one element, needed to be present in order for you to take, as a police officer, these actions: an emergency takedown, or using a controlled instrument. And that controlled instrument could be a baton, or it could be zip ties, or it could be that they needed to have you subdued by a trained canine. And the other is strong communications. This is the response to an active resistor. Now, in every one of these cases, in every one of these steps, they all absolutely indicate thought. The police officers are to think about how they are going to respond to certain levels of escalation. Now, we still haven't even gotten to the red part, but in these models are suggesting to members of the force that even if you have the power, and even though you have the power, you should not be so reticent to use power just because you have it. An active resistor. Now let's go to the assailant. We're going to go through the assailant. like I said, this is going to be done in several parts. Tonight, I was going to deal with this as well as deal with the situation with Chief Gerald Jones, or now the former Chief Gerald Jones of Flossmoor, and what has been going on out there. And so we're going to be dealing with that in a different podcast to talk about the unjust, unwarranted termination of the first black chief that they've hired in 100 years and fired in the same year. So we're going to talk about that in a different podcast. But I want to get through to hopefully get through each one of these. So let's talk about the assailant. Now, mind you, I was trying to get someone from law enforcement or retired or an expert to come on to help us through these, but in my conversations with police and retired police officers off air, they're not able to come on because there is there's risk for them doing that. So they're not able to do it. And I appreciate them providing me with information and time to get an understanding from a police perspective. Perspective. And there are some who have very, very strong feelings and thoughts about what took place on March 21st. So, assailant. All right. Assailant. We're right here on the first red, right here. And it says this: using or threatening the use of force without a weapon. Using or threatening the use of force without weapons. These are actions likely to cause physical injury. Now it's getting more into the serious. So, what are the direct mechanicals? The direct mechanicals is focused pressure strikes. So now the police officers are in a situation where they are going to have to subdue, control someone who is completely out of control. Now, it took us 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to this point. It took us 4 different sections to get to this point, which you could consider this to be 3/4 of the way escalating. Which gives people a chance to think about their behavior, gives people a chance to take a deep breath. But when you look at the videos and you look at the timeline, ask yourself the question with this information: did they act proportionately? Did they govern themselves proportionately? We're at the assailant side. being at the assailant side, we only got a couple of minutes left. These hours go so fast. But as I said, we're going to do some multiple discussions on this, because I really want for you and I want for us to be informed. I want for us to understand what the protocols are, what the policies are, what the training has been for police officers. Because as I read through a lot of this material, it's pretty comprehensive. But it's got to be applied. It's got to be applied through training, certainly through observation, and then ultimately through execution. But all of this has to be tempered. Now, look, we're going to leave it there for tonight. We may come back tomorrow night after our 10 by 10 to win meeting. We may do some more. And I'm going to continuously look for someone who can objectively come on and discuss with us these layers of policy and training that police officers go through. And I know that people get very heated about it, but we're going to be talking about that the next time out. So we left off with the assailant, but we're going to come back and we're going to start off with that, and we're going to come back. So we'll review. And so we're going to be dealing with the use of force, the use of deadly force. We're going to go through all of that information, because the average person, we don't know about what the policies are of police officers and their training. Not only the policy, but their training. We just don't know. So, with that said, just share this with someone. Share this information with someone, because we're going to come back and we're going to continue to talk about it. Love for more of you to join. You have questions, we're going to try to get an expert on who can talk about this, not to adjudicate, not to litigate. That's going to be done with. This is about informing us so that we can have a better understanding of our police department. We can have a better understanding of our police force, the men and women on the department, what kind of training they went through, and how they apply that training on the job. In particular, in these escalated moments. And are they the ones responsible for escalating? It sounds like in the training, that in the model, they're training you to take control of the escalation. That's what it sounds like to me. Not sure what it sounds like to you, but we'll see the next time that we get together. Listen, thank you all for tuning in to this second phase of it. The third phase, the fourth phase, we don't know how many we're going to have to do, but we're going to do it. We're going to go through it. We're going to go through it together, but we have to do it in a series. It is too much that we can compact this. It's too much that has to be unpacked in 1 hour. All right. Thank you all for tuning in to this special Wednesday night edition of the People Show with Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator. And look out for notices for the upcoming shows. And if you have not done so, if you haven't done so, please join us. Please join us as we are organizing the most powerful, largest, impactful voting block, Black independent voting block here in Chicago and Cook County in the state of Illinois. It is the only way for us to fundamentally transform conditions in our communities and liberate our people. We've got to be organized in participating in that process. So please text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385. Text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385. 855-909-1385. 855-909-1385. Text that number. All right. And then tomorrow you will receive a text alert around noon that will have the Zoom link in it. And you can join us tomorrow night. Join us tomorrow night. The meetings are an hour and a half. Sometimes we close a little bit sooner. And all we're talking about is how the Black electorate organizes itself together so that we have the power to select and elect people that we want, and that we have the power to hold those accountable who are in the positions of power, to make sure that investments are made to liberate and prosper our communities so that we can put people to work and people can go to a job and have a career. We've got to bring industry back into our areas to create opportunity for jobs, which creates opportunities for more businesses to function in our community. All right. So I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow night. Thank you all for tuning into the program tonight. And we may do another tomorrow following the 10 by 10 to win meeting. But join us, will you? 10 by 10 to win.